Caleb Turner never expected Christmas to feel anything but hollow. Yet that night on the frozen streets of Maple Ridge, fate led him to something he couldn't ignore. Under the pale glow of a street lamp, he froze at the sight of a frail girl scavenging through a trash bin. Her only companion, a worn-out German shepherd, shielding her with quiet loyalty. He took them back to the station, thinking it was nothing more than an act of kindness. But then he noticed the necklace around her neck, the very one his late partner Jake once wore. Inside that pendant was a secret, a clue powerful enough to reopen the case that had cost Jake his life. From that moment forward, Caleb's world, the girl's fragile future, and the dog's steadfast purpose were tied together forever. The town lay beneath a thick quilt of snow, its streets silent and painted silver by the lamps. Frost clung to diner windows and empty shop doors, while the faint scent of pine mixed with chimney smoke drifted through the night. It was Christmas Eve, but instead of joy, the streets felt abandoned, as if time itself had gone still. Caleb moved slowly through the quiet avenues, his breath curling white in the bitter air. At 35, he already bore the weight of someone older, his shoulders strong but slouched with grief. His storm-gray eyes carried shadows that never left, reminders of the night his partner was taken. 2 years had passed since Jake Ellison's death, yet Caleb hadn't celebrated a holiday since. The case had closed without answers, the evidence too thin, the silence too loud. He had chased every lead, but the trail always dissolved into nothing. As the church bells rang faintly in the distance, Caleb's chest ached with failure. Pulling his jacket tighter, he turned down a side street, only to stumble upon the image that would change everything. Near the back of a bakery sat a small figure huddled beside a dented dumpster. A girl, no older than 11, her tangled chestnut hair falling from a frayed hood. The coat she wore was thin and torn, her jeans ripped, her gloves mismatched and riddled with holes. Her face was smudged, her eyes guarded yet flickering with a stubborn spark. She sifted through garbage bags with practiced hands, the movements of someone who had done this far too often. Beside her stood a German shepherd, tall but gaunt, ribs faintly visible beneath his weathered coat. One ear bent at the tip, his brown eyes sharp yet weary as they locked on Caleb. Despite his frailty, the dog's stance was proud, protective, like a soldier still standing guard. The girl froze, clutching a torn paper bag, and the shepherd growled, stepping between her and the stranger. Caleb raised his hand slowly. "Easy," he murmured. The girl's voice was hoarse, cracked by cold. "We're not stealing. We're just hungry." Those words cut deeper than the winter air. Caleb studied her trembling shoulders, the loyal dog refusing to back down, and a wave of memory washed over him. Jake, promises broken, a case that still haunted him. He crouched gently, softening his tone. "What's your name?" She hesitated before whispering, "Maya, and this is Hunter." Hunter's ears twitched, the growl fading into a low rumble, though his body remained between her and Caleb. An old dog, worn but unyielding, pouring every ounce of strength into protecting the girl at his side. Caleb spoke carefully. "It's too cold to be out here tonight. Come with me, just for warmth, just for food." Maya's gaze darted nervously, as if measuring trust against survival. She clutched her coat tighter while Hunter glanced between them both. After a long pause, she gave a cautious nod. The police station was a small brick building at the edge of town, glowing faintly against the night. Inside, the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the faint scent of burnt coffee. Behind the desk sat Deputy Nora Harris, wiry, silver-streaked auburn hair tied back, her presence steady as stone. Raising 3 kids on her own had made her sharp yet compassionate, the kind of woman who could break tension with humor and stitch wounds with kindness. Her eyes widened when Caleb walked in with the girl and her dog. "Well, would you look at that? Santa's delivering strays this year?" Her voice was brisk, but her gaze softened. "This is Maya," Caleb said, "and Hunter. They need a place tonight." Nora didn't hesitate. She pulled a wool blanket from the supply closet and draped it around Maya's shoulders. "This coat won't do," she muttered gently. Maya clutched it like treasure, her eyes wide with gratitude. Hunter stayed alert, watching every move. When offered water, he refused to touch it until Maya drank first. Only then did he lap cautiously, his loyalty etched in every motion. Caleb's throat tightened. "He won't eat until she does," he murmured. Nora gave him a knowing glance before smiling thinly. "Hunter's got more manners than half the men I know." The air softened. Caleb warmed stew from the fridge, setting a bowl before Maya. She devoured it while Hunter's tail thumped softly each time she took a bite. Only when she was finished did Caleb slide a dish to the shepherd, who finally lowered his head to eat, slow and dignified, as if waiting for permission his whole life. The station grew warmer as snow tapped gently at the windows. A plastic Christmas tree with half its lights broken glowed faintly in the corner. Nora tugged a sweater from Lost and Found and pulled it over Hunter's head. "Don't laugh. It's ugly, but it's warm." To her surprise, Maya giggled, the sound fragile but real. Caleb pretended to shuffle papers, though his eyes kept drifting to the girl resting against her dog. For the first time in years, he felt something stir inside his chest. A flicker of hope. The night stretched on, quiet but filled with a fragile peace. Then, as Caleb glanced again, his eyes caught on something he couldn't believe. Around Maya's neck gleamed a silver necklace. He recognized it instantly. Oval-shaped, scratched along the edge, the same pendant Jake once wore. Caleb had seen it in locker rooms, in patrol cars, in every moment they'd worked together. It was impossible. And yet, there it was, resting against the collar of a child who had wandered in from the cold. He stepped closer, his voice careful, steady, but edged with disbelief. "Maya, where did you get that necklace?" Her hand flew to the pendant, gripping it tight, her eyes flashing with sudden fear. Hunter's head rose instantly, a growl deep in his chest. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering like a spark. "Why? Because it belonged to someone I knew?" Caleb said softly, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "Someone who mattered more than I can explain." Maya's gaze dropped to the floor. "I found it," she murmured. "About a month ago, near the highway past the ridge. It was snowing, and I was looking for cans in the ditch. Something caught the light, and it was this." Her fingers closed protectively around the pendant. "I didn't steal it. It looked special." Caleb lowered himself to her level, his breath shallow. "I believe you," he said, his tone breaking around the edges. "That man was my partner. He died during a case we never solved. That necklace was his." Hunter growled low, his eyes locked on Caleb's hand as it inched closer. Maya stiffened, clutching the pendant tighter. "Don't take it," she whispered. "It's all I have." He froze, pulling back at once. "No. You can keep it. Just, may I see it?" The girl studied him, weighing truth against fear. After what felt like an eternity, she slipped the chain over her head and laid it on the desk, though her hand hovered nearby, ready to snatch it back. Hunter gave a rumble of warning but eased when Maya's hand brushed his fur. Caleb lifted the pendant with trembling fingers. The metal was cold, heavy with memory. He turned it over, searching. A faint seam near the clasp caught his eye. Pressing carefully, the back slid open with a tiny click. Inside was a micro SD card, no bigger than a fingernail, yet it weighed on him like stone. His pulse roared. Jake had hidden something here, something he wanted protected at all costs. At that moment, Nora entered with a steaming mug of hot chocolate. She stopped short, eyes narrowing at the tension in the room. Maya was stiff, Hunter's muscles taut, and Caleb stood frozen with the locket open in his palm. "Everything all right?" she asked, steady but alert. Caleb turned the pendant toward her. "Do you recognize this?" Nora's brows furrowed, her expression shifting as she leaned closer. "That's Jake's," she whispered. "I remember. You carried his casket, Caleb. That necklace wasn't with him." Maya shifted uneasily under the weight of their stares. Nora softened, crouching beside her. "Sweetheart, tell us the truth. Where did you really find it?" The girl's lips trembled. She pulled the blanket tighter, as though it could shield her from more than the cold. "My mom died last winter," she said in a thin voice. "She got sick, and nobody helped us. After that, my dad, he left. Said he couldn't handle it. I've been alone since." Her eyes shimmered, though no tears fell. "Sometimes shelters let me stay, but most of the time I walk to stay warm. That night I saw it in the snow. I thought maybe it was lucky. Maybe it would keep me safe. Maybe you were meant to." Caleb swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the tiny card. Memories of Jake's laugh, his stubborn hope, the way he faced danger without hesitation. All of it pressed down on him. "Jake must have left evidence here," he said quietly. "If Maya found it near the highway, then that's where it all happened." Hunter barked once, sharp and sudden, startling the room. His ears pricked toward the necklace. Then he settled again, as if confirming what Caleb already knew. "Even Hunter understands?" Caleb muttered, a shiver running down his spine. The moment stretched heavy and fragile. At last, he closed the locket and slid it gently back across the desk. "Keep it with you. Safer that way. Thank you for guarding it." Maya slipped the chain back over her neck, relief softening her features. Hunter nudged her hand, reassured. Nora leaned against the desk, eyes fixed on Caleb. "So what now?" He stared out the window, where snow erased every track, every path, as though the world was daring him to find his own way. His jaw clenched. "Now I find out what Jake died for." The radiator hissed softly. Maya curled into Hunter's side, exhaustion pulling her down. Nora fetched a pillow and tucked it behind her head. Caleb sat beneath the glow of his desk lamp, shadows deepening around his weary face. For the first time in months, grief wasn't the only thing inside him. Direction flickered there too, faint but certain. The necklace hadn't returned by chance. It was fate, carried by a girl and her loyal dog on the coldest night of the year. And as snow buried Maple Ridge deeper in silence, Caleb Turner allowed himself to believe that somewhere in the quiet, the truth was still waiting to be found. Caleb Turner sat hunched at his desk, the dim glow of the lamp making the tiny memory card gleam like something more than plastic and metal. It looked fragile, but he knew it carried the weight of everything Jake had died for. His hands were steady as he slid it into his laptop, though his heartbeat thundered in his ears. The machine whirred to life, its cold light reflecting in his storm-gray eyes. At first, there was nothing but empty folders. Then, as he dug deeper, files began to surface. Some labeled plainly, others locked behind strings of unreadable code. A shaky video clip flickered onto the screen, showing the inside of a warehouse. Men exchanged crates in a hurry, their faces hidden, their voices clipped and urgent. Another file revealed documents spread across a table, a hand tracing names Caleb recognized from local business registries. And then came an audio file. The voice that spilled through the speakers froze Caleb where he sat. "Jake, calm but urgent. If you're hearing this, I didn't make it. They knew I was close. The evidence isn't all here. Some of it had to be hidden. Follow the ledger. And Caleb, trust no one." The room seemed to stop breathing. Caleb's throat tightened as if his friend had returned to sit across from him, passing the torch from beyond the grave. He wanted to play it again, to hear Jake's voice echo just once more, but he forced himself to keep moving. Most of the files were locked under encryption, far beyond what he could crack tonight. He'd need help, but the wrong ally could end everything. He leaned back, rubbing his face with weary hands, the radiator humming warmth into the room that he couldn't feel. If Jake had gone this far to hide the truth, it meant betrayal ran close, maybe even inside the department. The creak of footsteps broke his thoughts. Nora appeared, cheeks pink from the morning chill, a small paper bag tucked under her arm. She set it down on his desk with a quiet smile. "Stopped by Mrs. Carver's on the way in. She knitted sweaters for charity again this year. Thought Maya could use one." Inside was a pale blue sweater, uneven in its stitching but heavy with warmth. Nora's eyes softened as they drifted toward the corner, where Maya slept curled beneath a blanket. Hunter stretched beside her, his head close to her feet, ears flicking whenever the wind rattled the glass. "You're thinking too loud," Nora said, watching Caleb's tense shoulders. He gave a humorless laugh. "Just Jake's voice, still in my head." Her hand came down on his shoulder, grounding, steady. "Then listen to it, but don't let it burn you out. That girl needs you whole, not broken." Caleb nodded, slipping the card back into his pocket. The fewer who knew, the safer they all were. When Maya stirred awake, Nora held out the sweater. The girl's hazel eyes widened as she slipped it on. The sleeves swallowed her hands, but warmth spread instantly. "It's nice," she whispered, as though the word felt foreign on her tongue. "Keep it," Nora said softly. Hunter gave a low wag of approval, tail brushing against the cot. For a moment, peace lingered, but it broke the instant Hunter shot to his feet, his entire body tense. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he padded toward the frosted window. Caleb followed his gaze. Across the street, barely visible through drifting snow, stood a man in a heavy parka. His hood was low, his stance too still. He fumbled with a lighter, pretending to light a cigarette, but the posture was wrong. Too deliberate, too aware. After a moment, the man moved off down the block, his figure swallowed by snow. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Someone's watching," Hunter barked once, sharp and insistent, before pressing close to Maya's side as though bracing to shield her. Nora frowned. "Could be nothing. Could be everything," Caleb countered. "If Jake warned me not to trust anyone, silence doesn't mean safety." Maya sat wide-eyed, clutching the sweater close. Caleb knelt beside her. "No one knows about the card. Not yet. Not until we're ready." Nora didn't argue, though unease flickered in her expression. Secrets had a way of cracking cases wide open, and of destroying the people who held them. The day stretched long, shadows crawling over the precinct walls as Caleb wrestled with encrypted files he couldn't yet unlock. Jake's voice echoed in his mind, a ghostly guide. Outside, snow piled higher, erasing footprints as soon as they were made. And inside that small station, 3 unlikely souls. A broken officer, a lost child, and the dog who refused to let her face the world alone, waited in the stillness for whatever storm would come next. For now, the truth lay hidden. By the time night returned, the sky hung heavy and gray, the snow easing but leaving drifts piled high like barricades. Inside, Caleb Turner stared at a single decrypted folder. Tucked in its metadata were numbers, coordinates. A location Jake had marked, waiting like a whisper from the grave. The snow had swallowed Maple Ridge in silence, piling higher with each passing storm until the roads themselves seemed to vanish beneath white. Caleb eased the cruiser along a narrow trail, tires crunching against ice, headlights carving a weak path through the trees. Hunter sat rigid in the passenger seat, his fur dusted with frost, ears tilted forward as if he too understood where they were headed. The numbers hidden in Jake's files had matched what Caleb saw at the warehouse, and now the trail pointed deeper, into the frozen woods that bordered the industrial edge of town. Every turn of the wheel brought back Jake's voice, steady and urgent, warning him who not to trust. The files had revealed so little, yet enough to confirm that something bigger was moving beneath the quiet streets of Maple Ridge. Hunter shifted suddenly, his low rumble breaking the stillness of the car. Caleb's grip tightened on the wheel. Ahead, tire tracks cut fresh through the snow, weaving toward a clearing. Whoever came this way hadn't bothered to cover their path. Bold or careless, he killed the engine and let silence settle. The forest pressed close, branches heavy with ice, the kind of silence that made every breath sound too loud. Caleb stepped out, crunch of boots muffled by the thick drifts, Hunter leaping down beside him with the fluid grace of a predator on guard. Together they moved forward, the cold biting at Caleb's lungs, his gloved hand resting near the grip of his sidearm. The trees broke open into a clearing. At its center stood a structure half hidden by snow, a weather-beaten shed with its roof sagging under the weight of ice. It looked abandoned, but the tracks circling it told another story. Caleb crouched, brushing snow aside until the impression of heavy crates revealed itself. Something had been moved recently, and in a hurry. Hunter's growl deepened, ears pinned toward the shed. A faint glow slipped from the cracks in the wood, too faint for lantern light, too steady for fire. Caleb felt his chest tighten. Someone was inside. He reached slowly for his phone, raising the camera just enough to capture the scene. A snap, a blur of breath in the frozen air. Then movement. The door creaked open, spilling a sliver of light into the snow. A man stepped out, broad shoulders hunched against the cold, parka hood pulled low. He scanned the clearing once before striking a match, lighting a cigarette with deliberate calm. His breath mingled with smoke, curling against the night. Caleb ducked back, heart pounding, Hunter pressing close to his leg, ready to spring. The man exhaled, muttered something under his breath, then turned toward the woods on the far side. Two more figures followed him out, their boots crunching heavily, their voices low and sharp. They weren't here to hide. They were here to prepare. Caleb stayed frozen, listening to the rhythm of their words, catching fragments. Shipment, coordinates, tomorrow. Enough to know the storm Jake warned of was no longer creeping. It was standing right in front of him. He pulled Hunter back into the cover of the trees, the dog's muscles taut but obedient under his hand. Snow fell from the branches overhead as they retreated, each step measured, deliberate. By the time they reached the cruiser again, Caleb's pulse hadn't slowed. The files were no longer whispers of a threat. They were the map to something that was already unfolding. Hunter climbed into the seat, settling with a low huff, his eyes never leaving the path behind them. Caleb rested for a moment, hand on the steering wheel, watching his breath cloud the windshield. Somewhere out there, men were moving crates under the cover of Maple Ridge's silence. Somewhere, Jake's trail was pointing him closer to the truth. And as the snow kept falling, erasing tracks faster than he could follow them, Caleb understood one thing. Every step from here on out was borrowed time. Snow pressed heavy against Maple Ridge, muffling every corner of the town. But inside the precinct a fragile rhythm had returned. The coffee pot gurgled, papers rustled across Caleb's desk, and Hunter lay stretched near the door, his steady breaths filling the silence with something that felt like steadiness. Caleb turned the recorder over in his palm, the memory of the cabin still etched sharp in his mind. The crates, the scattered files, the trap waiting at the door. Whoever was moving shipments through those woods wasn't sloppy. They were careful, ruthless, and ready for anyone foolish enough to stumble too close. His gaze drifted toward the back room where Maya had dozed off beneath her blanket, sketchpad clutched to her chest, the pages crowded with dogs drawn in bold strokes, Hunter in different shapes and stances, always guarding, always near. It struck Caleb how much the girl clung to symbols of safety, building a world with crayons where loyalty never wavered. Nora leaned against the edge of his desk, arms folded, eyes sharp despite the long day. She studied him for a moment before speaking. "You look like you're carrying all of it alone." Caleb gave a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because if I share too much, it might break everything." Nora didn't press. Instead, she reached down and ran a hand across Hunter's back, the dog stirring just enough to lift his head and rest it against her leg. "Then at least don't shut him out," she said softly. Caleb nodded, knowing the truth in her words, though the weight of Jake's warning pressed harder with every new discovery. Trust no one. Yet here they were, Nora steady at his side, Maya building fragile hope out of sketches, and Hunter who had already saved him more than once. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing tracks in the forest where danger waited. But within these walls, warmth lingered in the smallest things. A girl learning to share cookies, a deputy refusing to let her guard down, a dog that chose to guard them both. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, hearing Jake's voice again like an echo from the past. The path ahead was darker than ever, but for the first time, he felt he wouldn't have to walk it alone. Caleb lingered over the words in Maya's notebook, the shaky letters holding more truth than she realized. Hunter was brave. Hunter did sleep by her door, warding off fears she carried from nights spent alone in the cold. For Caleb, the sight of that simple journal felt like an anchor, a reminder of why Jake's clues mattered, why the truth had to surface no matter the cost. but the weight of what Timothy had uncovered pressed like iron in his chest. Captain Raymond Keene, his mentor, the man who had once stood at the front of the department with speeches about honor and duty, now exposed as the rot at the core. Caleb could still hear Keene's voice, steady and commanding. "We keep this town safe, Turner, no matter the cost." But the weight of what Timothy had uncovered pressed like iron in his chest. Captain Raymond Keene, his mentor, the man who had once stood at the front of the department with speeches about honor and duty, now exposed as the rot at the core. Caleb could still hear Keene's voice, steady and commanding. "We keep this town safe, Turner, no matter the cost." Those words rang hollow now, twisted, because the cost had been Jake's life, and perhaps many more. Nora sat nearby, her jaw tight, eyes distant. She had always respected Keene's leadership, even when she didn't agree with his methods. To see his name in Jake's files was like seeing a ghost wearing a familiar face. Hunter stirred from his spot on the floor, head lifting as though he could sense the shift in the room, the weight settling over them all. Caleb pressed the memory card deeper into his pocket, almost as if hiding it from the world a moment longer would make the truth less dangerous. But there was no turning away now. The ledger was proof. The recordings and fragments Timothy had pulled free were enough to spark suspicion, enough to burn everything down if they landed in the wrong hands. Maya bent her head back over her notebook, pen scratching again. Her small voice floated into the silence. "If Hunter is brave, I can be too." She didn't look up, didn't realize the grown-ups in the room were unraveling. Nora's eyes softened, her hand brushing over Caleb's sleeve as if to ground him. "You're not carrying this by yourself anymore," she said quietly. Caleb nodded, though the truth of that was harder to accept than the files themselves. He glanced once more at the uneven scrawl of Hunter's journal, and for the first time since Jake's death, he felt the faint spark of something steadier than rage or grief. Purpose. The snow outside thickened, covering Maple Ridge in silence, but inside the precinct, 3 souls and a dog held fast against the storm, knowing that the real fight was only just beginning. The marshal's grip was firm, his words steady. "You've done this town a service most men wouldn't have had the grit to finish. Without you, and that dog, we wouldn't be standing here today." Caleb gave a quiet nod, the kind that carried more weight than thanks spoken aloud. Hunter sat at his side, snow flecking his coat, tail still for once, as if he understood the gravity of what had been won. From across the square, Maya came running, her new blue sweater peeking from beneath an oversized coat. She nearly stumbled in the drifts before throwing her arms around Hunter's neck. "I told you he was a hero," she said, her voice muffled in his fur. Hunter leaned into her, patient and proud, as though he had been waiting for that moment all along. Nora approached, auburn hair catching the winter light, her expression softer than Caleb had seen in years. "It's done," she said simply, though her eyes said more. That the worst had passed, that maybe, just maybe, Maple Ridge could breathe again. Caleb studied her for a long beat, then looked past her at the courthouse, the line of cuffed men, and the weight of a truth finally dragged into daylight. The ledger, the shipments, the betrayal that reached into the very heart of his department. It had all come crashing down, and yet in the ruins stood something unshaken. A girl who had found family where she least expected it. A deputy who refused to let the shadows win. And a dog whose loyalty had been stronger than fear. Snow fell in softer flakes now, drifting lazily instead of clawing with the wind. Caleb reached down, resting a hand on Hunter's back. "Jake would have wanted this," he murmured, half to himself, half to the memory of the partner who had set it all in motion. Hunter's ears flicked, as if he too remembered. Maya lifted her sketchpad then, a fresh page waiting, pencil poised. She glanced up at Caleb shyly. "I'm gonna draw today. Not the monsters. Just us." Caleb's throat tightened, but he managed a smile. "Make sure Hunter gets his armor right," he said, and she laughed, a sound that felt like the first true crack of spring in the middle of winter. As the agents loaded the last trucks and the square began to clear, Maple Ridge seemed less like a place buried under snow and more like a town waking from a long sleep. For Caleb Turner, There were still scars, still questions, still the ache of betrayal that wouldn't fade overnight. But with Nora at his side, Maya sketching hope back onto paper, and Hunter standing guard as always, he felt something he thought he'd lost for good. The future. Agent Paul Whitaker carried himself with the weight of decades in the field. His voice steady, worn with gravel but carrying a quiet kindness. His eyes held Caleb's with unflinching respect. You did the kind of work most would have turned away from. Jake Ellison didn't die for nothing. The words struck deep. Caleb had imagined this moment, but hearing Jake's name honored out loud carved an ache into his chest. He deserves it all, Caleb answered, his voice rough. I only followed where he led. Later, in the courthouse, the press swarmed. Reporters whispered in disbelief when Captain Raymond Keene's name was read among the arrested, the shock breaking through the polished room like a crack of thunder. Caleb stood firm, Hunter at his side. The German shepherd's coat brushed until it gleamed, his scarred ear bent but proud. Cameras clicked, drawn to the dog as much as the man. To the public, the headline was obvious: German shepherd unmasks smuggling ring. But Caleb knew better. This was never about glory. It was about loyalty, and loyalty had carried them through. When the lights faded, Caleb guided Maya through the crowded halls, her small hand tucked in his. She wore the new coat Nora had found, the buttons a little too big, but she walked with her chin high. Inside the family court, Judge Eleanor Briggs, stern but softened by the wisdom in her eyes, reviewed the papers in silence. At last she looked up. Officer Turner, adoption is no small vow. Are you certain this is the road you're ready to walk? Yes, ma'am, Caleb said without hesitation. She's already mine. The judge's gaze softened as she turned to Maya. And you, dear? Is this what you want? Maya's hazel eyes glistened as she lifted her chin toward Caleb. Yes, he's my dad. The judge signed with a flourish, and in that instant, the weight Caleb had carried for years seemed to lift. Maya's hand squeezed his, anchoring him in something he never thought he'd have again. Family. Back at the precinct, Nora received her own recognition. The sheriff pinned a silver star to her uniform, honoring her steadfastness and the way she had shielded Maya through the darkest hours. Nora smirked, brushing hair from her face. About time, she quipped, though the pride shining in her eyes betrayed how much it meant. Maya darted into her arms, declaring, Thank you, Aunt Harris. Nora laughed, tousling her hair. It's Deputy Harris to you, but I'll take it. That night, Maple Ridge gathered under string lights strung across the square. Laughter rose with the steam of food, set on long tables. Children chased one another through snow, and at the heart of it all stood Hunter. A ribbon was tied around his neck, his eyes alert and noble as the mayor announced. Tonight we honor not just the officers who uncovered the truth, but a hero with 4 paws who taught us what loyalty truly means. From this day forward, Hunter is an honorary K9 of Maple Ridge, our guardian. The crowd roared with cheers as Maya threw her arms around Hunter, her giggles ringing as he licked her face. Caleb bent close, whispering, You saved us, more times than I can count. This belongs to you. Hunter barked once, sharp and sure, as if he understood. Fireworks bloomed across the sky, their light reflecting off snowy rooftops. Caleb looked around, Maya clinging to Hunter, Nora smiling like family, neighbors gathered in warmth. For the first time in years, grief didn't crush him. It stood quietly at his side, reminding him of what Jake had sacrificed and what had been found in its place. A new year had come to Maple Ridge. Not just justice, but a daughter, a home, and a dog whose loyalty had become legend. Miracles don't always arrive with thunder and fire. Sometimes they come in the steady hand of a friend, in the embrace of a child, or in the watchful eyes of a loyal animal guiding us out of the storm. Caleb Turner had thought he lost everything, but in Maya and Hunter, God had given him back more than he ever dreamed.